Hello, everybody. Thanks for this chance to present some interesting things on ethical issues on robots and roboethics. So yeah, as I mentioned, I used to do some work on roboethics, but I also work on theories of technology and other philosophical issues and ethical issues related to technology. And right now I'm working on brain-computer interfaces and the ethical implications. So if you're not familiar, brain-computer interfaces are used to control devices with your brain or your thought, if you want to put it that way. But today I'm going to talk about robots and some ethical implications. I have to apologize in advance. There's no Terminator in this presentation. I just chose it for the maximum effect. Yeah, the Roomba is in there, but on the last slide. So here's what I'm going to do. First off, I'm going to start with a little history. That's usually just to warm up the crowd, because apparently, according to studies, in the first 5 minutes, people are not very attentive. But you're different, of course, so maybe I can go through this quickly. Then I say some brief words about what roboethics is. First, what ethics is, and then accordingly what roboethics deals with. And then I'm going to address some specific ethical issues concerning robots, where I will address primarily 4, so military robots, companion robots, assistive or care robots, self-driving cars, and then I'm going to say briefly some words on robot rights. So first, the historical part. It always I find it very astonishing that if you look at how people thought about artificial creatures and the position we are now in with robots, it seems almost like this is deterministic or inevitable that we are at this point. So here's an example. There's Talos, which according to Greek mythology is a giant automatic man made of bronze. And apparently, he's good at slaughtering your enemies. Given his size, I guess he's not good for cleaning your house. So this is what you have to use him for, I guess. Another example is Da Vinci's humanoid knight that he tried to develop in the 15th century. Another example, of course, I don't know if you're familiar with this work, is from Hoffmann's Der Sandmann, where Olympia is an artificial female. And then, of course, Fritz Lang's famous Metropolis, where one of the main protagonists is an artificial female named Maria, tellingly. And of course, there are many, many more examples where we kind of just obsess about our artificial creatures. So here's one of the latest installments is Ex Machina, where a female robot kind of outsmarts their masters. I don't want to spoil it, but she outsmarts their masters. The term robot, as I guess many of you know, comes from the Czech writer Karel Čapek, who used it first in the 1920s in his play Rossum's Universal Robot. And if I remember correctly, robot in Czech means, or robota in Czech means a servant, or sort of a slave that you use in your house. And also, very interestingly, this is one of the topics in many entertaining tales about robots, they kind of uprise against their masters. Another interesting historical thing, or what me astonishes about robots, is kind of how quick the development went. So beginning from the first industrial robot from 1961 to a multi-legged movable robot, barely 20 years later, to I guess you know this guy Asimov from 2000s, to self-driving cars that we have now. So I don't know, this timeline is always astonishing for me.
Very much like him.
Yeah, he does. I'm going to show some other examples that are very similar to this one. But moving on to a robot classification, because there are a lot of classifications around of how you put robots into categories. Here's just one example. You can choose to either classify them as industrial robots and mobile robots. And then if they're stationary, legged, or advanced, nano robots or whatnot. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to stick to a very simple classification. It's either industrial and non-industrial. I'm going to focus on the non-industrial part, where you can cluster like assistive, medical, social, or edutainment robots and military robots. And then accordingly, you have assistive roboethics, medical roboethics, social roboethics, and military roboethics. But as I said, multiple classifications are possible. It's just for the sake of the presentation. So what is roboethics, you might wonder. So I'm going to start off just saying a few words about ethics, and then accordingly saying some things about what roboethics is. So basically, ethics is concerned with the investigation of the right or wrong conduct towards either other human beings. That's pretty straightforward. I mean, we want to behave in an ethical or moral fashion. That's what ethics is for. We investigate the conduct towards other human beings. Then also like non-human living beings. I mean, there's the whole field of animal ethics. How should we treat our animals? The environment, there's environmental ethics. So we have a certain responsibility regarding our environment, to protect our environment, and so on. Then I'm going to pick this up later. Ethics also deals with our conduct towards artificial products. I mean, robots might not be that straightforward, but if you think about, for example, how we should treat, say, pieces of art, it seems that there's like a certain way that you are supposed to treat pieces of art. You're not supposed to destroy them. That would do some harm, but the ethical question then, of course, is, okay, harm to whom? What kind of harm is involved, and so on. But it seems at least plausible that we have like some certain obligations towards artificial products. So then accordingly, and I kind of like take just the definition from Zafestas that I found, roboethics is concerned with the examination and the analysis of ethical issues associated with the design and use of robots that possess a certain level of autonomy. So why is autonomy important? I mean, obviously, all kinds of robots raise some ethical issues. However, as the general rule, or kind of like a principle, the more autonomy somebody or something has, the more moral sensitivity is required. So think about it, for example, if you have a hammer, that's just a basic tool. You pick it up, you use it. So it's like not that ethically interesting because the autonomy purely lies with the human that uses it. But now think about like a fully, I mean, it's hypothetical, automated hammer that kind of like chooses when to do his like hammer action, whatever. So that's like a whole another issue. So the focus in this presentation is going to be on mobile autonomous or intelligent robots. So a short recap, I've said something about our kind of near obsession with artificial creatures. I proposed a short or simple robot classifications that I'm going to use in this talk. And then I introduced ethics and accordingly roboethics. So in the next section of this talk, I'm going to address first one proposal regarding roboethics. And this is where this guy comes in and is going to steal some of my work. But then I'm going to focus on four aspects or robot technologies and address specific ethical issues. First, military robots, companion robots, assistive robots, and then later on autonomous vehicles. I chose autonomous vehicles as an extra part because I have a very, I think, funny or interesting example that I want to show. But first, one idea to deal with roboethics or how to make robots behave in an ethical fashion is, okay, well, we could just go on and program them to behave ethically. We give them like a set of rules. For example, do this, don't do that. And then we just, let them roam free, and then all is good. Of course, as many of you know, I guess, one of the first to propose this was the author Isaac Asimov in his Place. And here are the 3 and later on 4 laws of robotics, but I don't need to read them because I can just use this guy, I hope.
One, a robot may not injure a human being or, through an action, allow a human being to come to harm. 2, a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings except where protection does not conflict with the first or second laws.
Excellent. So here we have a prime example of, I guess, one ethical issue. Robots are going to steal our jobs. I mean, not only the jobs that are like kind of like dirty, but also like the jobs of like intellectuals like me. So I guess, thank you. There's also a fourth law, but that's not important in this context.
Can I just curious?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, in general. What way, this is humanity in general, so it's different from number one, right?
Say again?
Seems similar to number one.
This one? The last one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty similar. I mean, he added it later, but as I said, it's not really important for the purpose. I just put it in for
completeness
completeness
sake.
sake.
Was too old to understand that they are the same law.
Maybe.
Actually.
Well, actually, if I may, I think it made me think in relation to your last list earlier, when you mentioned, I don't remember the terminology that you used, but you referred, say, art, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So like a painting.
Yeah.
So like if you destroy the Gioconda, supposedly you could be harming humanity, but you're not harming any human.
So it's simply a bigger, a stronger reformulation number one. So if you have four, you don't need one.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just saying to try and find,
So it substitutes one. That's my point.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Because if you have four, you don't need one.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, well, I guess we could come up with like an example where a robot, I don't know, works on like some a weapon of mass destruction that could ultimately kill humanity. Then I guess it would fall, under the fourth law. But of course, it also like kind of falls under the first.
No, but that would already would be number one, right? If you a weapon of mass destruction that will kill human beings, it's already implied in number one, okay?
Yeah.
But a piece of art is not, because you're not damaging directly a human being. You're damaging humanity by not allowing. But what Mario is saying, which is completely right, is that if you have the fourth, then you don't need the first one.
Yeah, depending on what injure means. That's what's going to be one of the problems.
Sorry.
But yeah, no. It's a perfectly valid point. But this leads to a problem of this approach. I mean, this is like an intuitive idea. We just give the robot like a set of rules. But of course, the problem is how do we define the terms? So I mean, what's a human? What's the human being that's not to be harmed? Or what is a person, right? Or what's a robot? It's not so clear. I mean, they're nano robots. They're kind of robots. But they're obviously different from this guy. So what's a robot? Then what is harm? And this leads back to what I just said. What does it mean to injure somebody? Is it just physically injury? Is it psychological injury? It's not so clear. So that's a problem of this approach. Then it leads to kind of like a rule bloat. So it seems that we need like tons of rules for like the myriad of situations that a robot could be in. So don't do this and this and this circumstances, or do this and this and this and this and this circumstances. Like it's kind of like just a huge amount of rules. Then one kind of like obvious problem is that the rules kind of conflict. So one example is the famous trolley case. So where you are faced with a decision, okay, should I let the trolley run over the, was it 5? Yeah, 5 people or the 1 person? So obviously there's like a conflict of rules here because you're not supposed to like harm human beings, but faced with this choice you kind of like have to. So what are you going to do? It's not so clear. And then that's another problem, that this approach is not feasible in certain contexts. For example, in military robots, we kind of like, I mean, that sounds kind of wrong, but we want them to harm human beings. That's what they're for. That's kind of their function. So it's not feasible, at least this set of rules. And this brings me exactly to military robots. I start with military robots because this is like I think the most ethically sensitive area because it directly impacts on the life and well-being of the humans involved. So here are some examples. This is pretty straightforward. It's just like an automated tank that drives autonomously. Then, of course, the drones with like such telling names as like Reaper. And this is one particularly disturbing example. If you haven't Googled it, I suggest you do, because how this thing moves is I find this very disturbing. It's like, it just moves in like a very uncanny way. So it's just very, very interesting. So this is like a pack bot that you could use to like transport luggage in the field. Military robots, I guess with military robots, it's just a matter of like, it's not a matter of like, not when or if, it's like just a matter of like how or how soon. Because as early as like 2005, the New York Times reported that the Pentagon plans to replace soldiers with robots. And in 2014, there was like a, sort of like a UN resolution to ban killer robots, and only, I guess, 5 countries.
I like the Vatican.
The Vatican is kind of it's always backed the lethal weapons ban, but this is like my favorite like formulation. Everyone else wasn't sure. It's like, okay, do you want to ban killer robots? I don't know. I'm not sure. Just it's a funny wording. So we shouldn't be mistaken in believing that fully automatic weapons aren't existing. They are. And I have 2 examples. There's one from South Korea. So this machine gun automatically, or can potentially automatically engage a target and fire without like any human in the loop. And in Russia, armed tanks patrol sensitive areas autonomously. So this already exists. It's not deployed on a large scale, but it exists. Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, is this the one in South Korea? Is it at
Yep.
the border by any chance?
I'm not 100% sure, but could be. It's plausible.
Just
Yeah.
wondering if it's going to be activated soon.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that implausible, but anyway.
Yeah. Exactly. So as I said, they exist already. I have like 2 other examples that technically are not like really military robots, but Dubai recently revealed a Robocop type policeman. I mean, this not this guy. That is supposed to like patrol the streets, so people can go there. It has like a display on his like belly, so people can like report stuff or make inquiries and so on and so on. It's not weaponized yet, I guess. And then there's like another example from Russia, where they're building like a Robocop type, soldier that is able to, in case you miss it, to hold like pistols and shoot, and it's also able to drive a truck. So there's like footage of him like driving a truck. I guess we can't win the robot revolution without just one weapon. So we need to. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some advantages of military robots. They reduce harm to soldiers, at least the soldiers on your side. They don't give in to emotions or rage. I mean, that kind of like links to the discussion that we had about like emotional enhancement. So a military robot doesn't really feel any rage. It just like coldly executes commands.
Scary.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So they just obey. They're not like human beings who are like, oh, should I do this? Should I not do this? And whatever. They just do. But of course, there are ethical concerns that needs to be addressed. For example, the firing decision. I mean, do you really want robots to have authority over who to kill or to fire at human beings? Obviously, it also relates to the distinction between civilians and combatants. That we need to make sure that they actually have the ability to distinguish this. Military robots might decrease the threshold of armed conflicts, and they could be some sort of like technical fix that blinds us to like a peaceful solution. So if I have like a robot army at my disposal and I have like some sort of conflict, so the threshold of deploying this army, because there's no human harm involved on my side, is sort of low. So I guess I don't need really to justify to my constituents why I send just a bunch of machine in to fix this problem that I have with my neighbor country, for example. And of course, there's responsibility distribution, and this also means that not only who is responsible when like a military robot does something that it's not supposed to do, but also which of the players are responsible. So there are like universities working on military technology. There's obviously the government is, in certain countries backing military technology. So the question is who is responsible and how should it be distributed? And then again, another question is, should the military robot be able to refuse an order? And how should we like implement this? The next kind of robots that I want to address are companion robots. Here are two examples. They're very, very cute. And companion robots are like used in your home or in the workspace to keep you company. So you can engage with them, you can kind of like talk to them, you can ask them questions, they kind of like talk back. And they also have like some advantages. So I always like address the advantages first to kind of like paint an even picture. It has been shown that they increase the communication abilities in autistic children, for example, and they increase social interaction and reduce stress in the workplace when they're employed in like offices, for example. And they, of course, can ameliorate loneliness. So if you are very lonely and you have this like mechanical companion running around that you can engage with and have like an emotional bond with, this is like a positive effect. But of course, this should not blind us to ethical issues. One of them is detachment and deception. Some people claim that these kind of robots, I mean, not this guy, but maybe like more sophisticated robots, they pretend to be something that they're not. They pretend to be, I don't know, your friend or like your partner in the household and so on and so on. But should we really allow this to happen? So should we have technology that kind of like deceives its users, given that people are potentially very attached or become potentially very attached to this technology? Then, of course, there's data security because these devices are deployed in like sensitive areas, so your home or in the office, and they are equipped with recording devices, so data security needs to be, and privacy needs to be ensured. Another question is the level of authority that is given to the robot. In particularly, how far should a robot be able to intervene? So in one scenario is you have a companion robot for a child, and the child is about to do something that it's not supposed to. Should the companion robot be able to really intervene and keep the child from doing this, or like reprimand the child and I don't know, shout out, don't do this. The third category that I want to address is assistive or care robots. I mean, this is a very familiar example. It's like this robot seal Paro. And this, I don't actually know the name of this thing. I don't know, I'm just going to call it, I don't know, Care Bear. Or, who can like carry, patients or the elderly. But there are many other care bots out there. Some of them are used for like feeding people. But this one is, carrying people from A to B. There are, again, advantages. They obviously are a great assistance in the daily life of people that are like disabled, ill, or elderly. They can again prevent the feeling of loneliness and provide for the mental welfare of people. They can also prevent danger because they monitor the health state and the behavior of the people. So if somebody slips, they can alert the human caretakers, or they can call an ambulance. They can remind people of to take their medicine and so on and so on. And they're obviously a countermeasure to the care gap in an aging population, especially in Japan, where they have like a more, relaxed attitude towards robot, and they're also don't like to bring in a lot of foreigners to do their care for them. So they're very much inclined to use robots to fill the care gap of the aging population. But again, there are ethical issues. So one is data security and privacy, because it relates to health information and health data that needs to be protected. It actually might reduce the social contact. So robots might be used as an excuse for social neglect. I mean, I used to work in a retirement home, and the elderly there, they don't get a lot of visitors. I mean, obviously they have family members and kids, but they're taken care of there. So I mean, there's no really need to visit them frequently. And then again, you could just just deploy a robot, so your mom or dad or whatever can stay at home, but you don't need to really check in that often because she or he has the robot. So it actually might lead to social neglect. Then there's the issue of objectification and autonomy. I can imagine a lot of people that are being handled by a robot are kind of feeling as an object. It is kind of being carried around or thrown around. It might create an illusion of relationship that it's not really there or it's not authentic. And And it also relates to the issue of deception that I mentioned earlier. And I guess the broader question would be, in what kind of society do we want to live? Do we really want machines to take care of our ill and elderly, or not? Or to what extent? These are like issues that need to be addressed on a broader societal level. And now for the example of autonomous vehicles. I mean, we're all familiar with the Tesla Model S that has been in the news recently because one crashed, I think it was in California, because it couldn't distinguish the white truck from the background and the driver wasn't like paying attention, so crashed into the truck, killed the driver. But the example that I want to talk about is the self-driving pizza car. I couldn't find an image without the brands, because it's a collaboration between Domino's and Ford. So they're working on an autonomous pizza car. So the way it works is you order a pizza, they put it in the car, the self-driving car drives to your location, and you can pick up your pizza from the rear window. So the window rolls down. I guess you have to put in like a code or like scan some barcode or whatever. The pizza rolls down, and you can the window rolls down. You can take out your pizza. So there's no need for the pizza delivery man or woman anymore. But again, this is like an experimental stage. So these things are actually driving around, but there is a human being present. But they're driving autonomously unless there is some situation where the driver needs to, or not the driver, the person sitting next to the machine needs to intervene. So again, there are obviously advantages. According to a recent McKinsey study, autonomous driving might reduce accidents up to like 90%. Obviously, it might lead to less cars on the road because you can just share cars and you can like order a car whenever you need it. It leads to better traffic flow because you can use the data from the cars that have network capabilities, and you already know, okay, the traffic flow is going to be this and this, take this route. The cars are interconnected, so they kind of like talk to each other, which leads to a better traffic flow. But again, there are ethical issues. So one is the responsibility description and the famous trolley problem that you will remember. So here again, so how should we enable the car to decide which option among these three to choose? I mean, should it like run over the group of people, or should it just hit the one pedestrian? Should it drive against the wall and possibly injuring or killing the people in the car? Or should it do neither? And the issue gets even more complicated when we think about complex situations where you actually have people that have different chances of survival. Like say one of them is like a motorcyclist with a helmet and one is a pedestrian. Should it run over the motorcyclist because he wears a helmet? He has a higher chance of survival, or should it, I don't know, run over the pedestrian? I don't know, it's a problem that needs to be addressed. Then again, what level of risks are we willing to take as a society with autonomous cars that are driving around our streets? And this kind of like leads back to what I said earlier with the threat to our jobs. There are like 3 million truck drivers in the US alone. I mean, what's going to happen to their jobs? I mean, we've seen like losses of jobs in other industries before. And of course, it's a complex issue because maybe jobs shift to another area. So some of the people will lose their jobs, some will find jobs in other industries. So it might just be a shift and not a complete loss. So a brief recap, I addressed one approach to addressing roboethics. It was Asimov's famous laws. And then I talked about some ethical issues that come up with military robots, companion robots, care robots, and self-driving cars. But you will remember what I said about ethics in the first couple of slides. It's not only concerned with how we conduct ourselves towards human beings and the environment and other non-human living beings, but also how we conduct ourselves towards artificial products. This is why I want to talk about robo rights, or the question of should robots be regarded as persons or not. So as recently as October this year, there's like the first robot citizen in Saudi Arabia, it is, I think. So this is Sophia. She's a citizen of Saudi Arabia. She's obviously a humanoid robot. So the question arises, how should we treat sophisticated machines? Should they have rights? If so, under what circumstances? The broader question is, I guess, what part should robots play in our social worlds? Should robots be regarded as persons? And if so, in what circumstances? And should they be given rights? And if so, under what circumstances and what kind of rights? I mean, companies, they have rights. They're like legal persons. They're not natural persons. So one idea would be to give maybe sophisticated robots or sophisticated machines the status of a legal person or citizens, as in the case of Saudi Arabia. So a general recap, I talked about our obsession with artificial creatures. I introduced like a simple classification that I used to talk about the ethical issues of robots. I briefly introduced what ethics and accordingly roboethics is. Then I addressed some ethical issues that come up regarding robots. And if there are no questions, this might be some questions that could lead the discussion, but they don't have to. So we could talk about the role that robots should have in the future, how or if they should embed an ethics code of some sort and how to go about it technically. Then the responsibility description, we could talk about this. Maybe you have some strong feelings about which kind of robots shouldn't be designed at all. That would be interesting to hear. Is there any risk of emotionally bonding with robots? It's, I think, a very interesting topic. And under what circumstances may a robot become a person or a citizen or a holder of rights? So this is this. Thank you for not falling asleep. So, and this is Roomba, but it comes without the chainsaw.